Welcome to the 5am podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders and influencers who are making headway and indeed some waves in their callings and industries. Today, we are joined by James Early, a dedicated thought leader and mindset coach who has transformed hundreds of lives through his unique approach to learning and spiritual growth. For over 15 years, James has conducted transformative workshops at Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, Connecticut, proving that meaningful change can happen in even the most challenging of environments. Through his Jesus Mindset coaching program, James helps people rediscover their ability to think, pray, love in their everyday lives. What makes James's approach particularly relevant to our 5am community is his emphasis on discipline, spiritual practices, and a mindset to transform how we approach each and every day. Now, get ready to fuel your personal development and create lasting transformation in your lives. And of course, before we roll that intro, we want to thank our listeners for their engagement on our social media platforms, on YouTube, and on your favorite podcast player. We are thankful for your participation, and we thank you for all the likes and the shares. And while many of our viewers are here on the North American continent, we want to say a special welcome to our listeners this realm, like those in Colombia, Russia, South Africa, and Southeast Asia. We thank you for being here and wanted to say hello. Thanks for joining us. So with that out of the way, let's roll that intro. James Early, welcome to the 5am podcast.
Hey, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good. And ladies and gentlemen, just to let you know what was going on, it's a good thing that James reminded me to hit the record button, because we were already having a great conversation, and there's only two of us. And so we need to bring in a few other people to join in and talk today and find out how we can kind of amp up our lives with considering how our gray matter gets involved in everything and our mindset. James, there's so many things that I want to talk to you about. Your work focuses on helping people change the way they think, or perhaps you might say their way of thinking. So for our audience who values that personal discipline and that positive mental attitude, how can we learn maybe to sweep out the dark corners of our mind to consider better ways of mindset or thinking?
Michael, that is such a fabulous question. There's so many ways I could jump on that merry-go-round to answer it, but here's what's coming to me. There's a passage in the book of Ephesians. It's chapter 4, verses 22, 23, and 24, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. Paul says, put off the old and put on the new man, which is created after God's righteousness in the likeness of God, something like that. And I really love that sort of three-step, I'll call it a process, where Paul is saying, yes, you can be transformed. Yes, you can put off this old way of thinking. Another thing Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 16 is, it's not really a throw. It's just like the end of a discussion. He says, we have the mind of Christ. We don't always act like it.
Right.
And so I think the first thing I'd say is to your listeners, you have the ability and you need to give yourselves permission, and you can do this. Give yourself permission to engage the mind of Christ as your own. It's kind of hard to say this, but to think of the mind of Christ as your mind. I mean, when we use our own little human mind to figure things out, to do things, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we can get in a big mess when we try to do things on our own. But so that's kind of the first thing I'd say. And coming back to this thing from Ephesians, I talk to a lot of people in my prison ministry and in my coaching program, and just, in conversations, a lot of people feel like they've made terrible mistakes in their lives, or they have a negative view of themselves. And they said, well, that's just the way it is. And you talk to a lot of psychologists and they say, well, you just have to accept those things. That's part of who you are. And I've come to the conclusion that whatever mistakes we've made, whatever bad habits we have or tendencies we have, either learned or just sort of seem to be natural to us.
Hmm.
A bad temper, for example, or whatever it is, fill in the blank. I like to come back to the original way that God created us in his image and likeness. Now, it seemed like that got messed up pretty quick in the story in Genesis, but I think if we can come back to that original identity as a child of God in his image and likeness, that's pure and holy. Even
Hmm.
even in several places in the Old Testament, God says to Moses and to people, "Be holy because I'm holy." We
Hmm.
reflect that. It's not something we can make on our own, where there can't be self-holiness or
Yeah.
self-righteousness. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is all these problems we have, our past mistakes, our sins, however big or small,
Yes.
they're kind of like mud that's not part of who we originally were as the image and likeness of God. One time in one of my classes in the prison, I asked the women in the group, hey, did you ever play in the mud as a kid? And of course they all did. Most of them did. And one lady said, hey, my kids played in the mud. They were so dirty, I didn't even recognize them. They were covered in so
Uh,
much mud. I said, well, do you still have that mud? Did you keep that mud?
yeah.
And no, of course, we know it's not part of us. And I would say, those things happen to us. Those mistakes we made, the way people treated us that caused us to
Hmm.
be a certain way, those things happen, but they're not part of our identity. And the reason that someone can transform is that to realize those aren't part of their identity. The mistakes they've made,
Hmm.
the negative thoughts or feelings that other people have imposed on them, and
Yeah.
that's what Paul is getting at. How can you put off the old man, the old way of thinking? If it's part of who God made you to be, then, well, you can't get rid of it because it's everything God does lasts forever.
Right.
But when we realize, okay, that's been imposed on me by the world, by Satan, by sin, however you want to talk about it, Jesus came to forgive our sins. That means they're washed away. They're
Yeah.
not part of us anymore.
Right.
So that's kind of a broad general stroke to answer your question, but
Hmm.
this whole idea of transformation is possible because I think transformation is really a rediscovery of who God originally made
Yes.
us to be.
That's a really good way to put it. Because when we're born into this life, the spark of life comes, and 9 months later, we're delivered out into this cold room with a guy or gal that slaps us, and then all of a sudden, people start putting. They might put a hat on the baby, they might put clothes on the baby, but they put all these ideas into
Mm,
the baby and they put names or labels on the baby, and then that baby grows and the baby will change clothes and diapers, and they'll grow and they'll outgrow things, but sometimes those labels stay. and
yeah.
and it sounds to me from what you're saying is that the creator had original label intent, let's say, for his creation, but the humans get in the way and they start putting labels on, and then someone thinks they have to live up to this label, that's whether it's hurtful or painful or good, and they're living up to these labels. Can you talk about maybe that original intent from God as he created us, and connect it back with what Paul was saying of it sounded to me like take off the old labels that have been put on you, and then actually choose from what the Lord has set before you.
Well, you just answered your own question,
I guess so.
basically.
I didn't mean to do
No,
that.
no, that's good. I love that paraphrase of
Mm,
Ephesians 4. Put off the old labels because, the way you see yourself
yeah.
is the way life happens to you. The
Mm,
way we see God, the way our concept of God determines the way we live our lives. If you think of God as this mean man up in the sky throwing thunderbolts at you every 5 minutes, if you did something for the tiniest little mistake you made,
yeah.
you're going to live your life in fear. If you think
Right.
of God as this loving presence, ready to help and protect you and guide you and heal you and all those things, you're going to live in a very different way. And
Absolutely.
so a lot of it's the
Mm,
lens that we're looking through that allows us to say, oh, wait a minute. I remember when I first got serious about my faith, I talked to my Sunday school teacher and she said, I was complaining about a particular relative who was very critical and judgmental, or that's the way I perceived it. She was
Yeah.
always picking on me. And it turns out I found out later it's because she loved me. I mean, that was her
Mm.
love language. She was
Yeah.
trying to make me, straighten me out. But this Sunday school teacher said, you know what? If she was standing there and you saw a black spider on her shoulder, you'd know that black spider wasn't part of her and you just brush it off. And she said that same way that you see her being critical and judgmental, that's not who she really is as a child of God. It's what appears on the surface,
Hmm.
and it's maybe what she's accepted about herself. But she said you can make that separation between the way she's acting and the way God originally created. The label that God puts on us is, this is
Yeah.
my beloved son. This is my beloved child, my beloved daughter. I mean, he said that to Jesus, but he
Yeah.
says that to you and me and everyone that's
Hmm.
listening, everybody. He's always telling us, oh, you're the apple of my eye. What
So
if we
how do
acted like that?
Yes. Yeah. I want to ask you then, how can someone determine the label they have on them, or if it's from God or not, but perhaps they don't like the label that's been put on them and they're looking for a new label? How do they go about that transformative process?
Whoa, that's a good question. There are lots of ways to think about that. I think maybe first is recognizing that it's just a label that has been attached. Either you've accepted it or somebody else has slapped it on your face or whatever. If you don't realize that it's a label that can be removed,
Mm-hmm.
you think of it as, this is the way I am. I've known people who said, well, this is the way I am.
Yeah.
And there's no effort to grow and progress as a human being, even on a human being level. But I think when we get a spiritual dimension in here and praying about it and everything, it gives us a little more bandwidth to actually deal with this stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
think the next step is to realize, well, do I really want to get rid of this label? Sometimes we find comfort in something negative. That's a whole nother issue to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be willing to say, okay, and maybe I'll put in here, I think we need a little spiritual curiosity. Like, well, how did God, what does it mean for God to make me in his image and likeness? I mean, when
Mm-hmm.
I look in the mirror, I see a reflection of myself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not thinking, okay, that's not what God looks like. I mean, it's about a spiritual, God is spirit. Jesus says God is spirit.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
everywhere, he's spiritual. We can't see him with the eyes. So the image and likeness of that has to be spiritual. And if
Mm-hmm.
we're just thinking of ourselves as this material human being trying to do the best we can,
Yeah.
we need that deeper dimension of who we are
Right.
spiritually. So I would say the next step is to think of all the different qualities and attributes of God, like that are true about God. He's loving, he's faithful, he's trustworthy, he's gentle, he's kind, he's firm, he's the source of all good. You could
Yeah.
make a list. My wife has a list of about 3,000
Wow.
qualities, and some of them are very finely nuanced. But then you start thinking, okay, this is what God is, and I'm the image and likeness of that. So the Bible talks about the beauty of holiness. I remember one time I was thinking, okay, God is the source of beauty. Oh my gosh, that means I'm beautiful. I mean, I never have thought of myself as one of the beautiful people, but I realized there's a spiritual beauty that we all
Mm.
have. And identifying with those qualities and claiming them and saying, okay, if that's the way God is and he made me in his image and likeness,
Yeah.
then even if I don't understand it completely, I have and reflect all those things. That's part of who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
And then the task becomes to, well, okay, then start acting like you're beautiful, or start
Right.
acting like you're intelligent, or start acting like you're loving, because you start putting those ideas into practice in your daily
That's
life.
right. Yeah, and they go out into the universe around us
Yeah.
and impact other people. One of kind of the scary words, you had mentioned fear, and I want to get into that because that's a pretty deep well to drink from. But
Yeah.
as you were speaking, I was thinking of John 10:10, where it says, where Jesus himself had said that the enemy, our spiritual enemy that we all have, it's one like a corporate enemy, comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. And Jesus came that we might have life and have it abundantly. So all those good attributes. And I was thinking of that the other word, repent. And really it only means just to turn away from things that are going to kill you. Like there's actually no good things that one might have to turn away from and stop doing. But it's in you speaking about the character of God and realizing that the only thing that he really wants us to put down are the things that are going to harm us.
Right.
And can let's talk about fear, unless you want to expound on that. But
Oh, no, no.
I did want to ask about fear, because fear is one of those things that seems to steal, kill, and destroy from a lot of people. And if somebody is a victim of that mindset, are there some practical steps that they can take to kind of leave that at the table and go find a different place to sit?
It's hard because when you're afraid, sometimes nothing
Hmm.
gets through to you. You're so
Yeah.
absorbed in the fear. And I used to believe, again, when I was sort of new in my faith, I used to feel like you had to get rid of the fear
Mm.
before God could work in your life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Not true at all.
I heard several people share their testimonies where they were still incredibly fearful and they
Mm.
were praying the best way they knew how. And God basically showed up, however you want to describe
Yeah.
it. The problem was resolved. And they were even kind of surprised and even maybe still a little fearful, even though the problem was not there anymore.
Hmm.
And so what I've realized is, however afraid I am, however afraid you are, and sometimes it can be pretty intense. Okay, so fine. But even in the midst of that, you can say, sometimes it's just a simple prayer, God, I need your help. Sometimes I have found, though, that when I feel my life is threatened, boy, my prayer life steps up,
Yeah.
in a way that it doesn't if I'm just sitting comfortably in my prayer chair.
That's true. It's true. And, one of the things that I talk a lot about on this show, and I know my wife and I chat about the Stoics and those philosophies, which it seems to me that they dovetail and fit together pretty well with the tenets of Christianity, and I'm sure other religions too. But I often read Seneca and quote Seneca. In this
Okay.
case, it's Seneca the Younger. He said, "Great men rejoice in adversity, just as a brave soldier rejoices in triumph in war." And sometimes maybe we don't know what to do with fear. It can have that paralyzing effect on us. But do you think that journaling might be a good way to deal with coming to terms with either what fear is causing in our lives or what it's causing in our minds?
What's interesting that you mentioned journaling. I mean, that's one of many
Mm.
things that you can do. I have been journaling since 1981. I
Wow.
have
Okay.
about 11 or 12 big journals that it's not every day, but
Right.
I totally agree with that. Sometimes I now can remember I've written out in my journal, God, I'm afraid of this. I'm write out how I'm feeling. And
Hmm.
as I'm writing out, it sort of frees me from it. Or I'll get an idea that I hadn't thought about. Maybe a Bible verse will come to me. Or sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
actually start having a conversation with God and I write that down. Sometimes the fear is my own inadequacies. There's so many different kinds of
Yeah.
fear.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm afraid, well, I don't think I can do that, God. You're telling me to do this. I'm afraid I can't pull that. You have to find somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes the fear is external. Sometimes it's something happens to us physically and we're sick or
Yeah.
whatever, and we're afraid.
Right.
Sometimes you feel your life is threatened. Sometimes it's whatever. Maybe it's financially. And I think over time, if we can make a practice of whatever the fear is, saying, okay, God,
Hmm.
here I am again. It's going to be interesting to see how you work it out this time.
Yeah. And if we are dealing with fearful circumstances or thoughts, we're actually in good company because the Bible is full of examples. I mean, say, I used to tell some of my coworkers, whatever your opinion of the Bible is, reading it, you actually see yourself in so many of the pages.
So
It's like
true.
the hero's journey that we see in film, it's the same that models the life of Christ. And so when we look through those pages of scriptures, even if it's just an allegory or whether it's a historical book and you're reading and you say, oh, wow, somebody feels the same way that I feel right now.
Yeah. One thing more I want to add to this whole thing about
Yeah.
you mentioned the Stoics and everything. And there are some very powerful ideas in some of
Hmm.
those writings, some of those thinkers. I would say for me, the biggest difference between that and how I try to approach things is a lot of times, and I haven't read them thoroughly, so I don't know,
Right.
but the human mind is an incredible tool.
Yeah.
And we are very clever and smart and capable of so many things, but there are some things the human mind cannot
Mm-hmm.
understand, cannot
Hmm.
perceive, cannot do just by human reasoning and human
Yeah.
thought processes and all that stuff. And I think that, there's some very smart people in the world who don't believe in God and get through life pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But I would encourage your listeners to follow what I'll call Jesus's model in this process.
Yeah.
Jesus, and this is Jesus that said this. He said,
Okay.
I can't do anything by myself.
Wow.
It's the Father who does it. And he says, I didn't come to teach my own doctrine. I didn't come to do my own will. He said, I only say what the Father tells me to say.
Mm.
Everything he tells me to say, I say. If I can see the Father do it, then I can do it, but I can't do
Yeah.
it by myself.
Right.
And I think sometimes we get afraid because we don't think we can do something.
Yeah.
And if we can be, you don't usually think of Jesus as being humble, but he was
Yeah.
incredibly humble or meek, whatever the right word is.
Right.
He wasn't reliant on his own personal abilities. But this is Jesus. He was relying completely on the Father. And
Right.
so the more I can do that,
Yeah.
I'm less fearful when something comes up and I'm realizing, okay, I
Hmm.
can't solve this on my own. I need your help, God.
Yeah.
So
And that
anyway,
that makes perfect sense and actually fits in really well with what I wanted to ask you next was which is your coaching program
okay.
and where you help people to embrace that mindset of Jesus. And so I wanted to ask you what specific mindset shifts have you found most transformative for your clients?
One of the things that has been big is letting go of the past, letting go of past opinions or past feelings because of past things that happened, past judgments, relationships that are on the rocks because of what happened in the
Right.
past.
Yeah.
And and embracing this mindset of Jesus of I help my clients see getting back to this idea of seeing
Yeah.
who they are as a child of God, made in God's image and likeness, and seeing the other person that way too.
Mm.
One place I go a lot is Jesus said at the very beginning of his ministry, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. At the end of his ministry, and he said that throughout, whenever he sent the disciples, the 12 or the 70 out to preach, he
Hmm.
said, tell them about the kingdom. He was always telling a new parable about this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. That
Yeah.
was his overall arching emphasis. We don't believe him. We still think heaven is way off after we die someplace.
Yeah.
What does that mean? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's here. It's now. It's near. Lots of translations. Later, he says the kingdom of God is within us.
Yeah.
I don't think we've scratched the surface on what that means.
Hmm.
And so I'm answering your question, but kind of a
Oh no,
roundabout
that's good.
way. So,
I'm having a feast.
okay. So at the end of Jesus's ministry, he's talking to Pilate, and Pilate is cross questioning him, and Jesus is sort of giving cryptic answers.
Yeah.
And Jesus finally says, okay, the reason I came to earth, he didn't say was to save people from their sins or to heal people or get
Hmm.
people saved. He said, I came to bear witness to the truth.
Yeah.
Now, to bear witness to the truth means you see it happen and then you tell others about it.
Wow.
So, what did Jesus see and what did he tell people? I think Jesus saw what was true in the kingdom of heaven right that moment. And for example, let's say, well, you tell me the first healing of Jesus that comes to mind from the Bible.
Wow. The first one.
Not the first one that happened, but one that just comes to mind.
I would say the at the pool of is it
Bethesda.
Bethesda, that's it.
Yeah, the guy that was lame for 38
30.
years.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is a great example. Everybody else saw this man that had been lame for 38 years, and he was there. He was hopeless. He couldn't. And think of how he saw himself as a total failure, all that stuff. That's how everybody else, that's how the world saw that man. I think Jesus saw something different. He saw what was true about that man in the kingdom of heaven. There is no lameness in the kingdom of heaven. And he saw that so clearly. Now, this is just the way I see things. So,
Yeah.
I wasn't there. I didn't talk to him and ask Jesus what he was thinking.
Yes.
But I'm trying to read between the lines here. He saw that man as God had made him in his image and likeness. And there was nothing, no disability in that. And Jesus saw that so clearly, it was like a light bulb went off, and then everybody else saw, oh, this man is healed. So from earth's perspective, the man was lame for so long, and then he was healed. But from heaven's perspective, from what's true in heaven, nothing changed. And so what I walk my clients through this process of what is true about you right now in the kingdom of heaven. And I'll say that to everyone that's listening. I would love for you to ask yourself, well, what is true about me in the kingdom of heaven right now? We know there's no pain, no sin, no sorrow, no tears, no crying, no death. Everything is full of God's love, God's goodness, God's grace, all these things. It's pure, holy spirituality. I mean, how can we even put words on all that?
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
what's true right now about you, about me, everyone listening right now. It takes a shift. You have to change the perspective that you're looking at something from. And here's a silly little example. Michael, let's say you and I are sitting across the table from each other, and the salt and the pepper are between us on the table. Well, to you, the salt is on the left, is on the right, and the pepper's on the left. But to me, the salt is on the left and the pepper's on the right. And so we're looking at the same thing from a different perspective. And as long as we look at things from a personal, earth-based, world view perspective, we see what the world sees. But when we look at things from heaven's perspective, we start to see what Jesus saw. We can look at ourselves, other people, situations from that perspective. And that's, I think, what brings healing. And so that's what I work with my clients to, once they get, that's like the first step in the process.
Wow.
And then you can start seeing, like I had a client one time, and we were talking about something that happened in the past. And I had just said something like, well, God is always talking to us. We just don't hear him. And so it came out of my mouth. The beautiful thing about coaching is it helps me too. We all get little aha moments. I said, okay, if God was talking to you at the time that you made that mistake, what was he saying at that time that you didn't hear him say? And so that put off a light bulb for her, but it also for me, I've gone back to several situations in my life where I was troubled or afraid or whatever. One time in particular, I was terribly afraid of a situation that was going to come up the next day. I couldn't sleep all night. And I went back to that situation. It was when I was like in 7th grade in school, long time ago. And so it's like I'm not carrying it around with me, or totally forgotten about it. But I went back and I said, okay, God, what were you saying to me at that night when I was so fearful? And my parents read Bible stories to me. They sang with me. They prayed with me. Nothing. I was like, whatever. I was so terrified. And it was all in my head.
Yeah.
But God then said to me, this is like several months ago, God said, well, this is what I was saying to you. I was saying, I'm holding you in my hand. I love you. And all the people in this situation you're going to be in, I love them and they love you. He was saying what was true in the kingdom of heaven. And even though I wasn't still troubled about that, I felt a sense of peace wash over me that I never did feel, at the time. And so that's a specific example of how when you start looking at things with the mind of Christ, from the perspective that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, what's true in the kingdom of heaven right now, that's how you can put off the old man. Because says, oh, that's not who I am.
Wow.
I don't identify with that anymore.
Well, that's great. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening to this, think about that comment section that's on the bottom of this YouTube video or on your favorite podcast player, and put something in the comments about, did this turn on any light bulbs for you? Just this aspect of what's true in the kingdom of heaven. Is it true in your life right now? And so while you're thinking about that, ladies and gentlemen, James, can you share your website and how people can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. By the way, I've just really enjoyed our conversation. We could probably go on for a couple
Oh,
of
yeah.
hours, but
I've got a few more questions for you, actually.
okay.
So, yeah.
Well, so the best way for people to get a hold of me is on my website. And Michael, I created a special page just for your listeners.
Oh, thank you.
So there's some resources there. If you'll go to thebiblespeakstoyou.com/5 a.m., the number 5, just like the name, that's the name of your podcast.
Yeah.
And I'll give you that link so you can put it in
Sure.
the links or whatever.
That's great.
So there's a way there for you to check out my podcast, which is called thebiblespeakstoyou.com.
Mhm.
There's also a playlist of previous episodes I've done that talk about this whole idea of embracing the mind of Christ, the mindset of Jesus, however you want to talk about it, to
Yeah.
think and pray and love more like Jesus. And then there's an opportunity if if you're listening right now and would like to think about this Jesus mindset coaching program, I have an opportunity for your listeners to have a free 1 hour coaching call. It's not a discovery call to see, it's an actual starting the process to see if that's something that would be helpful to them. And that's something I want to offer to all your
Thank you.
listeners. And
That's
all
generous.
those resources are on that page, thebiblespeakstoyou.com/5 a.m.
Well, I appreciate that. So, getting back into then our questions, because I have a couple more for you. And this changes. How does this knowledge then change the Lord's Prayer for you?
Nobody's ever asked me that question. I love that. So
Awesome.
this is the difference is prayer has become for me not asking God for something, not asking God to change something, but to seeing it's a prayer for God, open my eyes to see what's already true in
Yeah.
heaven. Well, and Jesus kind of hints at this when he says, we pray every day, hopefully, or several times a day,
Yes.
thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, it's already true in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you ever don't know what God's will is, we'll think, well, what is God's will in heaven? Okay, then that's what God's will is on earth. And so prayer has become more of a process of listening for what God is saying to me instead of me just telling him what my problems are, like he doesn't already know everything.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we treat God like an old man that's deaf, and we talk loud and we repeat ourselves and like, where are you, God? You're not listening. Well, he's listening. Are
Yes.
we listening?
That's right. Kind of
Yeah.
like we're sending a letter into Dear Abby, or dare I say, Ann Landers, way back in the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, just to sum all that up is, for
Mhm.
me, prayer now is bearing witness to the truth. So can I see God in heaven? Can I see his will being done? Can I see him in giving me my daily bread, my daily needs, supplying? Of course, in heaven, you have everything you need every moment. If I can really bear witness to that, then it shows up in my life humanly.
Yeah. Right.
And I think sometimes prayer, we're putting the cart before the horse, trying to change something, whereas we really need to change our perspective and go
Yeah.
to the other side of the table and look at it from God's
That's
perspective.
right. Yeah, not changing the circumstances, but changing our perspective of it. So then I wanted to ask you then, do you see a significant relationship between what Christ was saying of he was telling Pilate maybe hours before he was to be executed slowly on the cross, saying,
Yeah.
I came to bear witness. And then he says in his last dying breaths, he says, it is finished. Do you see is that kind of is that what he's saying is finished? He's done bearing witness?
I've heard people say that could mean lots of different things.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I wasn't there. He didn't tell me personally.
All right.
That's my like cop out answer. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
of all the answers I've heard to that, and the thing I think of is he said that after he had fulfilled all the prophecies up to that point of his
Gotcha.
career. And
Yeah.
he was saying it's finished, like, okay, the checklist is complete. That's the way I see that. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. I drank the vinegar. I didn't,
Yeah.
it's like they pierced me, the bones aren't broken. Check, 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 check. It's
Yeah.
finished. It's complete.
Yeah.
And I never thought of that in conjunction with what we were just talking about. So
Hmm.
you've given me a new little thing
Good.
yeah. So I think, well, Jesus knew what was going to happen on the
Hmm.
timeline.
Yeah.
But before he was crucified, he actually said to his disciples, in the world you will have tribulation,
Hmm.
but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. He could already see that victory because it was
Wow.
already true in heaven. He already had
Yeah.
that victory. And
Yeah.
so he had to go through the human steps of proving it, but he already, spiritually, I think he
Mhm.
had already borne witness to that. And that's what helped him go through that process. I mean, that
Yeah.
was a
Wow.
painful, agonizing thing he did.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. The weight of
eh,
the world
yeah,
was on him. Yes.
absolutely. And so, but I think and so to me, that sets an example. It's like, well, to all of you listening, if you're
Hmm.
going through a really tough challenge or even a little one, if you're going through a really tough challenge and things seem to be pressing in, the world's pressing in, or people are, arguing or whatever, we could take it
Yeah.
on the level of things that are going on in our country or the world right
Hmm.
now. There's always some issue going on. What if we could see the victory already in heaven? And the more we could bear witness to that, it's like, okay, I know at some point humanly, all this is
Yeah.
going to be resolved. It may not happen for hundreds or thousands of years, or it could happen in the blink of an eye. But if I can see it, what's true in heaven about these world events or my personal struggles right now, it gives us a sense of maybe we can say with Jesus, okay,
Yeah.
I've overcome this problem
Right.
already
Yeah.
spiritually.
Yeah.
And that's another way to follow Jesus'
Right.
example.
So then, just I guess this will be my last question. I used to do that when I was a reporter. I'd say, "This is my last question," and then they'd say something great. And I'd be like, "Okay, well, that was not my last question." But I, those media scrum people, they knew Michael was not telling the truth when I say last question because there's something else cooking. But I wanted to ask you then, like, this must be the Good Friday episode or something. There's something coming up for Good Friday. But seeing as how we're talking about the death, burial, and resurrection, and now we see Jesus actually say to his disciples to go and make disciples. Now, some people get that mixed up and they think converts. But as we were talking, I was thinking about that phrase from Jesus of actually making disciples. And then in our world that is so full of distractions and competing priorities, is there maybe a single principle from Jesus's life that maybe would benefit those, whether they're ambitious professionals seeking meaning alongside success? But is there maybe something a principle that we haven't touched on? And if we have, you can say that too, that really could give people a bit of a turbo boost to where they actually need to be.
Well, that's a pretty broad question.
Yeah. Sorry, it's a little too
No,
broad, but
that's okay. I'm trying to think of the thing that comes to me, and if this doesn't answer your question, let me know.
okay.
I'll give you permission to ask another
Okay.
question if you want to.
Yeah.
I think the biggest principle of Jesus's ministry was that he
Mm.
practiced what he preached.
Wow.
He didn't just say the words. The Pharisees were saying the words. He said, do what they say, but don't do what they do.
Hmm.
Jesus didn't just teach us ideas, he taught us by example of how to actually live
Yeah.
our lives. He gave some very practical advice. One time I was a guest on a podcast and very kind of evangelical, and she said, okay, James, you do the altar call here at the end. I
Oh.
was like, that's not my style. So this is what I said. I said, okay, if anybody's listening and they're thinking about who is this Jesus guy? Should I commit to be a follower of
Mm.
Jesus? I said, if you're in that camp, go read the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. Read that.
Yeah.
And then for a week, just try to do everything in there. And then let's talk. You know, I think Jesus was a man of action. He wasn't just philosophical ideas or this is what you're supposed to believe. He said, this is what you're supposed to do. So I
Yeah.
would say the thing that helps me get the most clarity in my life and what I try to help others get the clarity in their life about their purpose, what they need to
Hmm.
do in their life, whether it's one specific thing or a life goal, whatever, is take the Sermon on the Mount
Yeah.
and underline or make a list, however you want to do it, of all the things Jesus says to do. And then start working on that. What does it mean to be a peacemaker? What does it mean
Yeah.
to, love your neighbor? Take the beam out of your own eye before you try to straighten out somebody else's life. Boy,
Yeah.
I have to work on that a lot.
Yeah.
So start
Absolutely.
practicing those things.
Hmm.
And that has always given me clarity. And a
Wow.
lot of times it's like, okay, busted. I really have to work on this situation.
Yeah.
And maybe I've done a great job at that one thing at one time in my life, and another time I need to work on it all over again.
Right.
But that always gives me clarity, and that's what I would suggest
Oh, that's great.
to your listeners.
Good. Well, thank you. What I distill down from what you said is authenticity and follow through. That
Yeah,
kind of that fits with what you're saying. Well, ladies and
absolutely.
gentlemen, if you've been inspired by James' insights and our conversation today, I absolutely encourage you to go over and visit www.thebiblespeakstoyou.com/5am. And that'll be on the screen. Go there. Enjoy the free resources that will help with your mindset matters. And don't forget the very generous, kind offer from our friend James, where you can actually sign up for a 1 free hour with him. And you'll be able to do that. See if you're a good fit for more of those conversations with James. And I am positive that some of you are going to absolutely enjoy and appreciate that, not to mention all the other resources and podcasts and writings that are on his website. So have a look at that. Once again, thebiblespeakstoyou.com/5am. Click that and take advantage of the offers that are there from James. And James, a sincere thanks to you for joining me today on the 5am podcast.
Oh, it's been wonderful. You asked really great questions,
Well,
Michael.
thank you.
Some things nobody's ever asked before. That's
Oh,
always
good.
fun. So you
Yeah.
did a great job. Thank you.
That is great. I appreciate it. And it's just so nice to have this conversation. And as I often say, we're at a diner. And as you do, you eavesdrop on the people behind you. And in this case, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine, ladies and gentlemen, just to listen in. Share this with your friends. You might be thinking of somebody's name that you don't like, that you know needs to hear this. That's okay. They're probably thinking the same thing about you. But share this with your friends and enemies and those family members that you have issues with. Well, maybe not. I might be getting in trouble here. I'm meddling, but that's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you can share this. And if someone comes back and just say, Michael told me to, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
There you
So
go.
we thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, if you do want to give a 5-star review for 5am podcast, we would appreciate that. I also need to thank those people that have been generous souls over at buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast. We do appreciate those few virtual cups of coffee this week and last. So thank you for all of your support. Thank you for your shares and likes. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the show. Please go seize your day. And if you're new to 5am podcast, we have a great back catalog of other great conversations that help you to seize your day. And the last thing I want to mention is when we get up early, we get to see the sunrises, we get to see the sunsets, and we get that special spectrum of red and yellow, orange lights that are only twice a day. So ladies and gentlemen, seize your day. Thanks for being here. We're so glad that you came in today.